Good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us this evening to learn all about climate adaptation, rain gardens, and other nature-based solutions that you can use on your island property. I know I've been watching the puddles form in my driveway with all of that rain last week, and so I'm certainly looking forward to learning alongside you about practical steps that we can take to manage all of that rain. I do want to acknowledge that the beautiful lands and waters of the Islands Trust area have been home to Indigenous peoples since time immemorial, and that their deep connection to these islands continues to this day. So, as an uninvited guest on these territories, I acknowledge the great responsibility that we all have in learning to care for these lands and waters in what is truly one of the most special places in the world. My name is Chloe Straw, and I'm lucky enough to be the program coordinator of Islands Trust's Stewardship Education program that's bringing you this webinar tonight. And I'm joined by my colleague Morgana Van Niekerk, our communications specialist, who'll be supporting behind the scenes tonight. And I want to also send a shout out to our Director of Trust Area Services, Claire Frater, who is also online tonight to provide support. And I'm delighted to introduce our two fabulous presenters for the evening. We have Tara Stott, who is an environmental science officer with the Capital Regional District. With over 20 years of local government experience, Tara has led various environmentally focused initiatives, often with a focus on education. Tara developed the CRD's Septic Savvy education program and related bylaw to manage septic maintenance. And recently, she worked with the climate action team and actually developed the CRD's Extreme Heat Information Portal, helping residents and municipal planners understand the capital region's vulnerability and exposures to extreme heat. So, those extremes that we're seeing of extreme rainfall, extreme heat, and Tara's going to give us some really good information planning for those two different scenarios. She currently coordinates the Boker Creek Urban Watershed Renewal Initiative, which is a unique multi-jurisdictional effort to improve the health of a highly urbanized watershed, as well as provides educational information on preventing stormwater pollution and managing rainwater to reduce flooding and protect streams and shorelines. Also joining us this evening is Paulin Heath. Paulin is a proud father of three fine boys. He's lived on Gabriola Island for 25 years, and he and his wife Lisa have been designing, running, and creating Watercliff Permaculture Farm since 2012. The farm has been Paulin's vocation, classroom, canvas, and teacher as he strived to tease out the possibility of a financially viable agriculture system, one that's sustainable, organic, regenerative, and resilient. Paulin believes a radical rethinking of our food system is the best leverage point towards a strong local economy and towards food security, as well as being the best leverage point towards climate mitigation and climate adaptation. Reading those bios just gave me goosebumps. We're really in for a treat tonight. Um, Before we get started, I did just want to share a few housekeeping items. So due to the large number of attendees tonight, only the host, myself, and the presenters will appear on the screen, and audience members will be muted and your cameras will be off. Please don't take that to mean that we don't want to hear from you. We very much want to get your questions and comments. So please do type them into that Q&A box that you should see at the bottom of your screen. And Morgana and I will be monitoring the Q&A throughout the presentations so that when we get to our question and answer period after the two presentations, we will take time to go through your questions. We're also recording the webinar tonight so that we can make it available on our Stewardship Education webpage, as well as our Islands Trust YouTube channel. And just a note that I will send out a link to that video to everyone who's registered for the webinar tonight. So without further ado, I'm going to hand it over to Tara to kick us off with her presentation.
Okay, great. Bear with me one moment. Thank you for that lovely introduction while I share my screens. Okay, are you seeing the correct screen there?
Looks great.
Okay. Okay, well, thank you. I'm really pleased to be here to talk about how we can manage rainwater runoff with rain gardens. I would just like to acknowledge that I'm coming to you from Lekwungen territory in Victoria today, and the CRD conducts its business with over 19 First Nations in their traditional territories. I spend much of my time in Wasanich territory, and I'm very grateful to be raising my children in these lands. Okay, a little bit of an outline for you as we talk about rainwater in the environment. We'll talk through some development impacts and some climate projections. I'm focused mostly on the Capital Regional District, although much of the information will be similar throughout the Gulf Islands. We'll talk about mimicking the natural environment with green stormwater infrastructure, as well as the co-benefits and biodiversity that rain gardens can provide. And then we'll get into the nitty-gritty and we'll talk about a rain garden DIY and talk through the 4 steps of planning, building, planting, and maintaining a rain garden. And I'll talk through some native plants that are good for rain gardens as well. I'm going to refer in the presentation to a lot of different resources, and I will provide this presentation as well as a list of resources and links following the webinar. Okay, so to start out, the natural environment does a very good job of managing varying levels of rainfall. So we all live in a watershed, which is the area of land that drains water to a common point, whether that's a creek or a stream, sometimes a water body, or even a shoreline. And these watersheds developed over thousands of years to do a very good job at managing rainfall. Old forested areas have a topography of what's known as pits and mounds from tree growth and decay, and these pits and mounds do a really good job of absorbing and storing rainfall. We also have lots of larger wetland areas, and those can store a really huge amount of rainwater. And the humusy soil that's created in these forested areas also does a really good job of storing water in the top layers of soil. In the image here, it's shown as the interflow layer in this diagram, and it's really capable of storing a large volume of water. And of course, some water is distributed underneath the ground to our groundwater supplies, which is really important in many areas for drinking water. So if we look closer at the water balance in the natural conditions versus developed areas, we can see some key differences. Under natural conditions, about 20% of rainfall is passed on to our groundwater supplies, and 40 to 60% is evaporated and contributes to cooling and other key processes in the environment. And you can see in the interflow layer there that 40 to 60% can be stored in the vegetation and the soil in that top about 12 inches of soil. And in the natural environment, less than 1% is running off or considered runoff. And after development, we see some changes. So less than 10% is passed on to our groundwater supplies. We see the interflow is less than or around 20%, and our runoff increases to as much as 30 to 50%, depending on the level of development. So there are a number of reasons for this increased runoff, as well as various impacts. In more rural areas, we often see land clearing for crops or agriculture, and this also removes the pit and mound topography that does such a good job of storing that rainfall. We see more runoff and increased erosion when rain runs off of this environment. And we usually manage our stormwater runoff in these areas with ditches, which convey the water directly to creeks, streams, or shorelines fairly quickly. They don't allow a lot of absorption or treatment, and they also pick up pollutants in the environment. In the urban environment, this is much more intense. We see increased infrastructure and stormwater pipes that convey increased volumes of rainwater or stormwater much faster as it comes off our roads, driveways, paved areas, and hits the creek very quickly. So as property owners, we have both a challenge and an opportunity. So I know that Gulf Islanders are very familiar with that rain is a resource and that we need to conserve and protect it. If we look at a quarter-acre lot, we can see the vast potential to preserve the rain that's falling as runoff and may not be able to absorb due to our structures and paved impervious areas. And if we zoom out to the watershed scale and have a look at the hydrological function of our watersheds, so we can see that the hydrological function works across the landscape, across many properties, and it's developed over many years. And it's the vegetation as well as the topography of the land that provides the hydrological function and also provides a lot of biodiversity and for plants, animals, and fungi. When we start to look at the hydrological function in a developed watershed, we can see that there's a lot of changes. The rain can't absorb through those hard surfaces, such as buildings and structures, our roads, and paved areas. Often we're piping water, changing the topography. We may be changing wetland structures as we develop. And what this creates is a challenge, especially as we're facing the changing climate of increased and more intense rainfall. Not only does the rainfall pick up pollutants as it travels over these surfaces, but it travels very quickly to our creeks, streams, and shorelines, and it can cause turbulence, increasing water temperature, and other issues for fish and aquatic habitat. So some of these impacts some of these are related to quantity, so the volume of rainfall that's running off of our built environment, such as flooding and erosion. And some of these are related to pollution. So the pollutants that the runoff picks up from various things in the environment, such as fertilizer, pesticides, it can be bacteria from animal waste or leaking septic or sewer systems. And of course, road runoff, which can include pollutants from oil leaks, but also things like brake dust and tire toxins. You may have heard in the news recently that there's been a discovery that one of the preservatives that we use on our tires, vehicle tires, is called 6-ppdq, and it can cause salmon mortality at very, very low levels. So it's quite a challenge that we're going to have to address. And we know that the future is also changing. So the climate projections for the capital region show that our summer rainfall is decreasing, and by the 2050s, we can expect a reduction of about 15% on average to already low summer rainfalls. So really important that we're recharging our groundwater supplies, as Gulf Islanders are all familiar with. We also know that our wettest days are getting wetter with an increase in rainfall intensity. So this volume of water that's coming off of our structures is going to be more intense. And we will have more winter days with heavy rain, and the amount of heavy rain that falls will be greater on an annual basis. We also know that we will experience longer, drier, hotter summers. We're already seeing an increase in the number of extreme heat days. which were pretty much non-existent in the 90s, and we're now starting to see on an annual basis. Quite shockingly, this can grow to as much as 21 days by the 2050s. So this is going to have a big impact on our watersheds as plants experience drought, and it can also contribute to less absorption capacity with fall rains. So it's sort of like if you've ever left a sponge out in your yard and it's become really dry and brittle, it can be really hard to get that sponge to absorb water afterwards. That's sort of what can happen as we experience long droughts with our soil. And of course, also lots of impacts to people. In 2021, many people lost their lives due to the extreme heat dome that we experienced. So what can we do to adapt to this changing climate? We need to create more absorbent landscapes and start to try to mimic what we had in the natural environment. So this is occurring in many areas, certainly in the capital region. You can see it taking place in the form of green roofs, pervious pavement, increased tree planting, and rain gardens, both in the urban and the residential environment. And really what we're doing is we're looking to mimic nature in order to prevent some of these impacts that our development and our runoff is creating. So in the image on the left, so here's an example from an urban area. On the image on the left, you can see a traffic island, and in this case, the storm water and the runoff from the road flows directly into that storm grate, which leads directly to a creek or stream. And on the right, there's a curb cut in advance of that storm drain. So the water is intercepted and diverted into this, in this case, an engineered rain garden, where the storm water flows and it's stored and absorbed in the soil, as well as treated through filtration and uptake by vegetation. So you can also see that the biodiversity is greatly improved with the variety of plants. Those plants will provide some evapotranspiration and cooling, and it will also provide some habitat in the community. So you can see we have a really good opportunity here to develop and mitigate these challenges that we have. So green stormwater infrastructure really is mimicking the natural environment with these processes. And there's a great variety of methods and types. They all are designed based on rainfall capture targets and calculations from regions. And the CRD has a number of regions that we've developed rainfall capture targets for. And we have these green stormwater guidelines that they're available on our website if you'd like to explore them. They are somewhat technical in nature, and they're designed for municipalities as well as engineers and landscape architects. And the goal of all green stormwater infrastructure is demonstrated in the images on the cover there. So we're trying to capture and slow the flow of stormwater by redirecting it into natural facilities with safe dispersion and absorption. We're also trying to clean and infiltrate the stormwater before it reaches the receiving environment. And we're also trying to minimize peak flows so that in heavy rain events, we don't have huge rushes of water creating turbulence in our water bodies. And the Green Stormwater Guidelines, if you do check it out, and I'll provide this in my resource list, but it also has a really good planting list for rain gardens. So it's got good lists of each zone and according to wet and dry conditions where you might want to plant. So most green stormwater infrastructure uses vegetation, and we really can't underestimate the power of trees. They do a really good job of absorbing water, and they also provide unlimited co-benefits. maintaining existing vegetation on your property, especially large trees, does a very good job of supporting the natural environment. And it also helps to maintain that top 12 inches of soil that provides the really good interflow and storage of water. And that's the water that slowly recharges our water bodies when we have droughts in the summer, and also our groundwater supplies. Of course, trees and plants and vegetation also contribute to biodiversity. And biodiversity is really important to our ecosystems, and it helps us to be resilient to challenges like climate change, disease, and other disturbances. The more diverse an ecosystem is, the more resilient we are. And you may know that of all the provinces, BC is has the most biodiversity in Canada. And in the capital region, we are a hotspot for biodiversity. So we have very unique Douglas fir forests, Garry oak meadows, wetlands, and shorelines here. We do have 210 species that have been identified at risk. And there's a lot that private property owners can do to provide important habitat for plants and animals on their property. Okay, so now we're going to get into rain garden do-it-yourself. So one of the reasons that rain gardens are so popular as a method is because they can be done by a property owner with some relatively simple designs. So essentially, a rain garden is a landscape area that absorbs and filters stormwater runoff that comes off our rooftops, our driveways, patios, and other impervious surfaces. And they have many benefits. They can reduce flooding on your property and neighboring properties. They can reduce erosion in creeks and streams. They can also filter out pollutants before they reach our storm drains or enter our waterways. And they can recharge our groundwater supplies. They also provide really good habitat for beneficial insects, birds, and wildlife, especially if you're using native plants. And essentially, a rain garden is a depressed garden structure, sort of like a bowl that is designed to absorb and store and infiltrate rainwater. So we're going to talk through 4 steps of building a rain garden, from plan to build to plant and then maintain. So I can't really stress enough the importance of planning. This is really sort of the most important part and where you want to spend quite a bit of time. The first thing you want to do is develop a good site plan. And one tool that can be useful is to start out at Google Maps, or if you're in the capital region, you can go to the CRD website and use Intramaps and print out an online map of your property. And this can really help you with your site plan. It can improve accuracy. And then you want to get going and develop your site plan and include things like property lines. You want to include neighboring land uses as well as any sensitive areas or water bodies. You want to make sure you know where buried utility lines are, and you can call BC One Call to get information on that before you start digging. You also will want to know the locations of your downspouts and the dimensions of structures like driveways, patios, and decks. You also definitely want to know where your septic system area is and where your water, if you have a water well, where those are located. You also may want to mark things like large trees and existing vegetation. And you can also note drainage pathways if they exist. So this is a really good time of year to be getting out in your yard and sort of looking around and watching the flow of water across your landscape and just becoming familiar with what's going on. As you're out there, you can be considering where a good spot is to locate your rain garden. So a few setbacks are you want to stay safely away from structures, and that means 3 meters from any building. You also want to be close enough to the source of where you're going to receive your rainfall from. So 10 meters is a good sort of maximum that you want to go from your source. You're going to need to stay 100 feet from any drinking water well and 3 meters from a septic tank or 10 meters from a septic field. You want to be in a spot where water can flow by gravity and an open area that's not going to disturb any existing vegetation is good. You also don't want to have any standing water or shallow groundwater in the area. So it can be kind of counterintuitive. Homeowners often think, oh, I've got an area with really soggy soil and this would be a great spot for a rain garden, but we're actually going to be adding water to this area. So you want it to be a relatively dry area that can absorb more rainfall. You're also going to want a relatively flat area and you're going to need a good amount of space. So 200 to 400 square feet. And this is also a good time for you to check with your municipality or any building or planning officials to confirm requirements. Most of the areas that I'm familiar with, the municipalities of Victoria and Saanich both have specific requirements for rain gardens. Okay, then you're going to want to do a little bit more detailed work to determine exactly how much space do you need. So some people design several rain gardens based on the proximity to the runoff that they want to collect. So it may be that you can divide your roof area into sections. Smaller rain gardens are generally easier to manage. So if you've got a peak across your house, you can calculate the drainage area for that portion of your roof, if that makes sense. And for the general do-it-yourselfer, we use a 20% rule. So you're going to apply a 20% formula simply by multiplying the total drainage area by 0.2 to give you the square footage needed for your rain garden. So we've got an example here. If you've got an 800 square foot roof area that you're going to collect rainfall from, you're going to multiply by that by 0.2 to give you 160 square feet. And then you're also going to want to take a look at your slope. So if the area does have some slope to it, you're going to want to take a measurement of that slope. So in the example here is sort of a simple method of doing this using a couple of stakes and some string. You're going to want to determine the height and divide that by the width. So just a tip is to use a level to make sure that your string is straight, because you can really be off quite a bit in your calculation. So you want to be figuring those out as accurate as possible. And if your slope turns out to be greater than 5%, it's not a good spot for a do-it-yourself rain garden. And this might be a time when you decide you want to have a professional do the site because it's a bit challenging, or you want to have a larger rain garden that covers an area equal to or greater than maybe 1,500 square feet. So we kind of recommend that for a do-it-yourselfer, you want to have a maximum size for your rain garden of about 300 square feet. Okay, so if you've got a good spot and you don't have too much of a slope, the next thing we're going to do is test the soil. And this is just a simple percolation test here. Your municipality or your planning authority might have a specific protocol that they want you to follow. In this case, you're just going to dig a hole approximately 60 centimeters or 2 feet deep. You want the soil to be saturated before you do your test. So you're going to fill the hole with water completely and then let it drain, which can take some time, up to 24 hours. And then when you do your test, you're going to fill the hole again with 20 centimeters of water. You can just use a yardstick or a ruler to make sure you've got the right depth. And if the water does not completely drain in 12 hours, it's not a good spot for a rain garden. So you're looking for soil characteristics that allow a good permeability. So sandy soil has very high permeability, but low water retention and can be challenging for plants. Clay has very low permeability, but it has high water retention. And loamy is sort of what we're looking for. It's a good balance of permeability and water retention. Okay, we're still planning. So the next step, if your percolation test turns out good and you don't have too much slope and you've got a good area for your rain garden, is to start doing some design of your rain garden. So popular shapes for rain gardens, they can occur in various shapes, such as a kidney or a crescent. The bottom area is required to be level and flat, and that's where we're going to measure our square footage requirement from. Then you're going to add side slopes of no greater than 2:1. The more gradual that you do your side slopes, the better. And then the depth that you're going to plan for is you're going to plan for approximately 20 to 30 inches deep. So you're going to include a ponding area that allows for a depth of 6 inches. And you're also going to want to plan for an overflow containment berm of 6 inches. So this can either be obtained by creating an above ground berm around the rain garden, or you can dig down an additional 6 inches. And then you're also going to want to plan for how you're going to transport the runoff to your rain garden and your inlet area. And you're going to also want to plan for an outlet and a safe overflow area. So in more urban areas, there's often a requirement to connect an underdrain and or an overflow to the storm drain system. In more rural areas, this can just be an outlet that distributes any excess water into a landscaped area. I've borrowed this image from the District of Saanach's best practices because it just demonstrates that flat area of the bottom of the rain garden that you want to use for your sizing calculations. So the rain garden calculation really needs to be based on the bottom flat area and not include the total diameter of the rain garden. So the rain garden is going to take up more area in the landscape than your basic square footage. And so that's just a good demonstration of that. Okay, and then you're going to plan how you get your runoff to the rain garden. So there's a few methods for this. You can just use a landscaped area such as a swale and design it with plants and decorative rock to be open, like an open channel. You can deliver it through a pipe that's either buried or it's above ground. And you want to again be considering the slope here. So 2% is ideal. If you have a much steeper area, then you can utilize small rock check dams every 5 to 10 feet to slow the flow of water. And you're also going to need to prevent erosion in this area. So rock is a good thing to use in your swale as well as in your inlet to prevent erosion. If you'd like to divert runoff from your driveway rather than your roof, it can be quite challenging in some circumstances because you'll need to recontour the driveway. But if you're already doing some renovations or changes to your driveway, that could be beneficial. But another way is to add an asphalt speed bump. So this can help you to divert the water into the area that you want for your rain garden. And this can have a really good impact on water quality because often the contaminants that are the most toxic are coming off of our roads and vehicles. Okay, you're going to want to plan the safe escape outlet. So this will only occur in more rare circumstances. Generally, the conservative do-it-yourself numbers that we're using to plan our rain garden will collect at least 90% of the rainfall a year. So it will be occasional that this overflows, but you still want to have a safe overflow. So you want to have a safe location that you can direct water to. You want to be avoiding driveways or sidewalks or neighboring properties. And although we do want to use rock to prevent erosion, we want most of the rain garden to be planted. So we don't want to overuse rock throughout the rain garden. That's a common mistake that people run into issues because there's not enough vegetation planted in the rain garden absorbing the rainwater. Okay, on to step 2. So you're going to lay out the rain garden, ensuring that that flat area of square footage is covered, marking the inlet and outlet, planning your transport from your roof or driveway, and planning for that overflow area, either by digging down or using a berm. Then you're going to excavate and prepare your soil. So if you are digging down, you're going to include 6 inches for the overflow containment. You're going to include 6 inches for that ponding depth. And then you're going to include 18 to 24 inches for the rain garden soil depth. So that gives you about 30 to 36 inches that you want to be within. And most people find that digging by hand is sufficient. And don't need to bring a machine in. But if you are using a machine, you just want to be really careful to avoid compaction in the rain garden area and stay out of the area you're building the rain garden. You're going to create a soil mix. So with the soil that you excavate, you will have some left over. You're going to remove a third and amend that with compost. And this will improve the quality of the soil and the absorption, as well as the ability for plants to get established. So you will have some leftover soil. You can use some of that to improve your berm, or you may have other places that you can use it. There are lots of different ways that you can do the transport of the water. In the top left there, they're using a vegetated swale. You can see the rock check dams as it transports water down to the rain garden. On the top right, there's sort of an open decorative pipe. The bottom right is piped underground, but you can see the rocked inlet and outlet. Okay, so for step 3, we're going to plant and mulch. And in the rain garden, there's 3 zones. So you want to do your planting plan based on these 3 zones and the amount that they need to tolerate wet conditions. You also want to be thinking about how much sun the plants will receive, as well as any maintenance needs. So I've done a couple of examples here, and I'll include in the resources some really good planting lists. This one is from the District of Saanich. We also have one in our Green Stormwater Infrastructure Guidelines, and there's also a really good planting list in the guidebook from Western Washington. So there's really good native plant recommendations for each of these zones. And some examples here are hardhack and Pacific 9-bark, sedges and rushes. So that's slow sedge on the bottom left there. And sedges and rushes are very good for the ponding area of the rain garden. And then some plants recommended for the drier and the dry to moist zone include sword fern, dull Oregon grape, sea thrift, and plants like kinnikinick, which isn't shown here, but is a really lovely low growing ground cover. Do a good job of framing the edge of the garden and can be helpful to suppress weeds and just delineate the garden from the surrounding landscape. Okay, so a few planting tips are just to choose plants with their mature size in mind. You are going to want your rain garden to be very densely planted. When the garden matures, it shouldn't have any bare soil. It can be tricky to obtain native plants, so you might want to plan ahead and inquire with local nurseries for plant availability. And you're also going to need to be a little bit forgiving. Some plants are not going to make it, and you may have to move things around because each rain garden is going to have its own unique circumstances in terms of the wet zones. And lastly, you're going to need to do a little bit of maintenance. In the first couple of years, you're going to water the plants to make sure they're well established. After 2 to 3 years, if you're using mostly native plants, there will be likely just little amounts of watering. You're going to want to replenish mulch layers to prevent erosion as well as control weeds, improve infiltration, and of course, conserve water during the drier months. You can weed as necessary by hand, and we do not recommend you use any fertilizers or pesticides. And you're just going to want to check your inflow and outflow areas to make sure they're clear of debris, leaves, and etc. can clog these areas. And then you're just going to want to observe and check your flow with the first rainfalls on an annual basis, as well as with any large storms or heavy rainfalls. Okay, so I know I went a bit over time. Thanks very much to everybody for your time and attention. It was a lot of info to get through. I aimed to provide you with a bit of an overview so you can look at building a rain garden on your own property.
Thank you so much, Tara. I know I'm scribbling down notes and taking screenshots to text to my husband. Time to get planning. Um, I know there are some questions that have come in for Tara. We will get to those, so we are tracking them. Please keep plotting those questions into the Q&A. After our second presentation, we will have time for a nice discussion to get your questions answered. And so now I'm going to pass it over to Colin. And let me just share that presentation.
Okay.
All right, go ahead,
There we
Colin.
are. Okay. Okay, great. Well, thank you. That was fun, Tara. Thank you. And I'm just going to hop right into it. Okay. There's a lot of crossovers, which is fun to see. Um, all right. I'm just going to start by stating that the biggest climate-induced change that will affect agriculture, as well as trees and all forms of ecology, will probably be the extremes and variability of moisture, with greater periods of drought paired with greater periods of inundation. And the best way to manage and prepare for both drought and flood-like conditions is to build healthy, organic, rich, bioactive, oxygenated soils. And so that's what I'm going to talk a lot about. Oh, sorry. Um, Although climate change is already affecting us here on the West Coast and will certainly continue to do so, we will probably begin to most feel the effects in our day-to-day lives when more brittle environments like California go through drastic upheaval. Currently, roughly 75% of our produce comes straight from California. When that flow is disrupted, food security and growing our own sustenance will become much more important. And then as a bonus, every aspect I'm going to discuss on building greater resilience as a climate adaptation strategy is also the best climate change mitigation strategy that I know of, as every technique seeks to sequester carbon out of our atmosphere and store it where we need it most in our soils. Also, healthier soils equal healthier plants, which equals a healthier us. The majority of my presentation will be spent on techniques for building healthy soil, but I do want to touch on the use of swales. And so I think we see a swale. Oops, I've lost my audio. We see a swale there. Sorry, there we go. Oh, geez, sorry. There we go. Yeah, and so on our farm, fruit trees would not survive our rainy season. The crowns of the trees would drown. So the swales function both to slow, store, sink, and cycle our surface water, but equally important is the berm, which is which is the swale. The berm is on the downslopes of the swale itself, and it creates a raised growing medium for our fruit trees and our perennials. True swales are built 100% on contour. We don't actually build true swales on our farm. They would just fill with water, and it would soon it would overflow. And so to build a swale, soil is removed in a gentle U shape and placed downslope in an equal gentle U slope to create an elevated berm. All sorts of sizes are possible. On our farm, our larger swales, which double as our main pathways across the farm in the summer, are roughly 8 to 12 inches deep in the middle and about 3 to 4 feet wide, with a 5 to 7 foot berm, which is raised about 6 to 8 inches. This is a fun picture there. We just dug this swale like the day before. It was quite dry, and then it rained overnight. And so this is on our farm. That's how much one night of rain can change our dynamic on our farm. That's me and Arlo when he was quite younger, just walking to check it out. Yeah, that all showed up overnight. But you can see how much water is caught there that would have flowed on the surface over our farm and off our farm, and it catches there. Um, Here on the west coast during our rainy seasons, swales quickly fill faster than they can absorb, and they will overflow. So unless you design purposefully erosion-resistant spillways, it is best to incorporate a very gentle slope. A ditch is a trench that's dug on a slope to purposely remove excess water quickly. Our west coast swales are dug with as gentle of a slope as possible to still move water, but as slowly as possible, fast enough to avoid overflowing in times of deluge. For us on our farm, that's about a 1% slope in general. Um, yeah. The ducks also really like the swales. When they're full, they go roaring up and down them. Um, Swales effectively slow and store surface runoff long enough to absorb into the soil and cycle excesses deep into the water table rather than running off into the ocean, carrying precious silts, soils, and nutrients with it. It's one thing that's cool about the swales. Like after a big rain, when the water disperses, you'll see all the silt that it has caught, and it's in there. And I'll put it back on the berms every now and then. They run across our farm interspersed every feet or so. The berms are planted with fruit trees and perennials, and between the swales, we grow our planting blocks of raised beds. And these swales also really help our raised beds. They're not so soggy in the winter, so we can grow a winter farm, but they still get enough moisture that it doesn't make it droutish in the summer. So I have cisterns, ponds, swales, and other water storage techniques are great and by all means should be used where applicable. However, the most efficient, cheapest, readily available, environmentally friendly way to store water is in the soil itself. And the best way to increase that capacity is to improve the soil. That's actually our greenhouse in a it's about as bare as you'll ever see the soil, but it's in our greenhouse, so it's not getting rained on. Um, Essentially, how to improve our soil is to add organic matter, thereby improving water holding capacity, bioactivity, oxygenation, and structure. And then I have why add organic matter. Adding organic matter to soils improves both sandy, well-drained soils and clay-based heavy soils. Yeah, both of them benefit from organic matter. Adding organic matter improves the capacity to hold on to water and survive drought conditions, as well as the soil's capacity to absorb water, but retain structure and oxygen enough in saturated soils. Also, organic matter is the energy food stuff for the billions of small-scale interactions undergone in a healthy living soil, causing the breakdown and bioavailability of nutrients, so stuff grows better. I'm going to talk about compost. Probably the most common, easiest way of adding organic matter to soils is in the form of compost. Whole books have been and will continue to be written on the subject. It's a multidisciplinary, ever-evolving art form, but it's one that everyone should partake in. Our piles are typically made with an alternating layers of chicken bedding, weeds, garden scraps, and horse manure. We usually wait until we can make a nice 3x3x3 pile and build it all at once. We often send our chickens in to help flip the piles, which you can see there in the picture. They will flatten a pile in a day or two, and then we get the chickens out of there and we fork them back up and let them sit. We'll usually do that 2 or 3 times for a pile with like a 3-4 week rest in between. What I have to add that might not be found in most composting books is that when making compost, adding a certain amount of soil is not a bad idea, especially if your pile is getting too hot and beginning to off-gas nutrients. It's especially if you have sandy soil, when you're making compost, it's sort of your opportunity to add a little bit of clay. If you add clay to sandy soil, you'll make cob and it turns into a brick. But if you add that clay into the compost itself, the humus will sort of magically buffer it, and you can sneak in a bit of clay into your sandy soils, or sorry, vice versa, you can sneak in, oh dear, sorry, technical, there we go, there we go. Yeah, you could also add sand to your, if you have a clay-rich soil, which we do. So we add a little bit of sand into our composts, and it's a good way to incorporate that into our clay-based soil. Also, the compost pile is probably the best place to inoculate char and turn it into biochar. I'm going to talk about biochar in a minute, but if we ever have available char, we always add it to our compost piles. And as a rough estimate, I'm going to talk a little bit more about compost, but that's fine. As a rough estimate, I believe it takes about half an inch of compost to produce fast-growing, nutrient-dense annuals in my garden beds just to break even. That's in order not to degrade the soil. If I want to improve the soil as I grow, which since our goal is to build resilience, I need to add even more than that. On our small, roughly 3-acre farm, we buy 14 yards of compost and I make between 6 and 10 yards depending on materials. That just meets our needs to stay above even on the carbon front. Luckily, we have other strategies as well, which we will cover. And also half our farm is planted in perennials and fruit trees, which operate on a completely different carbon system. Unfortunately, it's hard to find quality compost to buy. Most garden centers sell high-priced forest fines that are just mixed with some form of nitrogen source, just enough to legally be called compost. We have found a source up in Arrington that just uses chicken bedding and alder chips, and that's the best compost I've ever bought. That's what I continue to buy, but it is expensive, and so is the transport. However, it's far better than Cinnabar or McNutt. We did buy truckloads of that twice, one each, and it was quite disappointing. I couldn't use it even on my fruit trees, so that's a warning about buying compost. So I am going to talk about biochar now. Essentially, it's a complicated topic, but I'm going to do a very quick job of it here. Essentially, it is made by the burning of wood or other organics in the absence of oxygen. So as all the tannins and the other gases burn off, you're left with a pure carbon skeleton. The carbon never combusts. That's the whole trick. And so you're left with all the carbon, which just so happens to have multiple thousands of nutrient attachment sites and be the perfect habitat for all the beneficial microbes and soil dwellers, as well as a fine host for mycelium. There are $1 million high-tech off-gas capture and reburn electricity creating biochar systems. And then on the other extreme, there is the simple cone-shaped pit in the ground with careful layering of wood to create an oxygen blanket as the burn progresses upwards. And then there are systems in the middle. Here on Gabriola, we have a Blue Heron Society has invested in a metal inverted pyramid model system, which they lend out cheaply. They also run workshops and do education outreach. We've run a couple on our farm, and we plan to collaborate with them more in the future. An important aspect of the system is you have to immediately quench the burn with water at the end of the process, thereby locking the charcoal in its char stage and not allowing it to continue smoldering and converting into ash, which is what you don't want. The huge difference in benefit between charcoal and other kinds of carbon is its resistance to decomposition. Whereas most organics placed in a healthy bioactive soil will be completely broken down in one growing season, charcoal has been found to remain up to thousands of years. Yeah, and I'm going to just talk quickly about the terra preta soils in the Amazon. They call it the magic black earth. It confounded the Western world when they first, I put it in brackets, discovered this deep black storehouse of organic nutrient-rich topsoil deep in the Amazon, and they didn't understand how it was there. Usually all soil life in the Amazon is locked up in the roots and growing biomass of the jungle, other than maybe an inch or two of leafy mulch on the surface. This is why when the rainforest is cut to graze cattle or grow cash crops, it takes no time for the fertility to decline and the soil to become dry and lifeless. But terra preta behaves very differently, achieving levels of 2 to 3 deep topsoil instead of inches, and it maintains its integrity for thousands of years, mostly because the biochar doesn't break down. It's important to note that char itself, although full of receptors and attachment sites, is basically inert and has to be thoroughly activated/inoculated to become useful biochar. Indeed, uncharged char added to your garden soil will suck up more nutrients in the short term than they would ever give you back that growing season. The easiest way to inoculate the char is to add charcoal to your compost piles. It can also be soaked in buckets with high nutrient solutions like fish emulsion or like compost tea. We often soak it first and then we add it to our compost to get both benefits. I'm going to talk a little bit about low to no till. Tilling is very effective. It's very effective at getting rid of weeds and preparing the soil for planting. It also introduces a ton of oxygen, which speeds up soil decomposition and releases nutrients. It's so effective, it has become the base step for most agriculture, sometimes 2 or 3 tills before planting. Unfortunately, all those benefits come with a cost. Tilling burns up organic matter. Fluff soil often collapses, especially when a crop is removed and then the rains set in, needing more tillage next season. Tilling brings up new weed seeds, which typically germinate a couple days before your own seeds. Tillage also leaves the soil completely bare and fluffed, exposing it at its most vulnerable to both erosion from water and erosion from wind. I just have here that North America's largest export by far in the last 100 years has probably been the unintentional exportation of topsoil. Unfortunately, most of it was exported to where we need it the least, into our waterways, clogging up estuaries and flowing out to the sea. There are places in the Great Plains where it is estimated that we've lost over 5 feet of topsoil, which is pretty incredible. Um, Tillage also completely obliterates mycelium, thereby eradicating at least half of nature's normal system of nutrient dispersal and uptake. Conventional agriculture, and even most organic agriculture, has completely forgotten this, relying exclusively on bacterial nutrient breakdown for organic production and water-soluble chemical synthesized nutrients for conventional systems. Water-soluble chemical fertilizer averages a staggering 5% or less efficiency rate, the nutrients making it to plants. The rest just joins the water cycle, flowing off into our waterways and working its way into the oceans. Um, yeah, it is well understood how mycelium functions, or it's becoming well understood how mycelium functions as the underground distributor and communication systems in an intact, healthy forest. I will talk about perennials and fruit trees and how they can be grown in the model of a healthy forest. But it is worth mentioning that most annuals could greatly benefit from the same nurturing web if the tillage cycle were to be broken and the soil was to be protected. Having intact mycelium running through our garden beds would easily reduce both our water needs and our fertilizer needs by up to half. Mostly that's because the mycelium itself is almost like the internet of underground. It spreads out all the nutrients and it holds on to water and brings it where you need it. And it's quite an interesting system. Full no-till advocates usually add at least 2 to 3 inches of compost in order to have a nice fluffy seed bed. Since that much compost may not be realistic or sustainable for many of us, low-till is an attempt at a happy medium. Essentially, low-till is scratching the top 2 to 3 inches in order to mix in the addition of compost and nutrients without damaging the integrity and structure underneath. If you have a clay-based soil, like we do, low-till does very little in the short term to loosen and aerate your subsoil. So we use a broad fork. It's a great low-tech solution for this. A broad fork has these long 12-inch tines, which you sink into the soil by rocking back and forth with your human weight. And then you gently lever them upwards, just lifting them enough to add oxygen and break any crusting, but not inverting the topsoil or wrecking the structure. I also have transplant starts rather than starting seeds, fits the no to low till system more easily as we go from removal of one crop to transplant of healthy little rooted starts, never leaving the soil bare and unprotected. We pretty much only direct seed carrots, radishes, and sometimes beets and cover crops. Everything else we pretty much transplant now, never waiting over bare soil to see how germination went. And then I'm going to talk about mulch. Mulch, there's some mulch there. There's grass clippings. I think that's a little bit of wood chips. There's some bracken fern, some maple leaves and straw. I just gathered those up this morning. Um, it's an easy way to protect the soil, reduce evaporation, reduce weed pressure, and slowly incorporate organic matter is mulch. Yeah, mulch works great around squash, cucumbers, peppers, cabbages, any plant with wide spacing. Mulch can also be used to mulch whole beds over the winter to protect them from heavy rains and suppress the weeds. It works well, but worth taking off in the spring when you want to warm the soil because it keeps the soil wet and cold in the spring. It also can be a slug and bug paradise. I put here, we do follow Bill Mollison's advice on the you don't have a slug problem, you have a lack of ducks front. We have ducks that free range the farm all winter. They keep our spring slug pill bugs pretty much reasonable. In addition to organic mulches like leaves, straw, wood chips, and grass clippings, there are non-organic mulches like cardboard, paper, and tarps. And in the picture there, you'll see a big black silage tarp. We resisted silage tarps for years, but as the farm got bigger, it sometimes wasn't realistic to collect enough organic matter to cover our growing system. Tarps can be super handy. They do protect the soil from the winter rains and break down weed residue, revealing a ready-to-plant dark earth when removed with good timing. Silage tarps are a little more expensive, but made to resist UV breakdown. That tarp there is probably like 6 years old, and yeah, there's no wear and tear on it as long as you don't bust it with sharp sticks. And then I'm going to talk a little bit about cover crops. Cover crops are plants specifically grown to increase organic matter, both above the ground and also below the ground in the form of roots. A great option to protect your soil and keep it bioactive over the winter. And as a bonus, it boosts organics if you can get them started in time. This is a challenge for us because we are always starting them a little bit later than ideal because our summer crops are still in and growing. Um, Buckwheat and crimson clover are great because they'll self-kill in January when the first real hard frost comes, and then they just break down on their own, completely gone by spring usually. There's oats and fall rye, and also favas and winter peas, which we use. They're more hardy, and they do grow all winter, which is great. However, we have to till them in the spring or suppress them with a tarp, which can take a long time. And if the soil's too wet, sometimes we can't even till them in till too late, and it sets us back a bit. So mostly we use the crimson clover and the buckwheat. And so then we're going to talk about, the fruit trees. So in contrast to annuals, perennials are designed to never be tilled again after planting. It's a very different system. It's much easier to build soil when you're growing perennials and fruit trees. Also, due to the non-tillage and some heavy carbon mulching, maple leaves, alder chips, and the tree's own leaves, the soil will naturally become mycelium friendly and start cycling nutrients very efficiently, needing very little in the way of additions, although always loving some carbon-based compost, fresh wood chips, and I add calcium to our fruit trees every fall and sometimes in the spring. We also typically inoculate the fruit tree roots with mycelium, although I think now our farm has it everywhere. I think it would do okay without it, but we just do it anyway. It just helps establish that right off the bat, because then when it has the proper mycelium, it's connected to that web. I'm going to quickly talk about forest gardening and guilds. Forest gardening is the art of gardening like a forest, not in a forest so much, but you're creating your own forest. I have fir, cedar, maple, and alder dominated forests. Although amazing ecosystems do not produce a whole lot of human food. However, we can use their regenerative model to create many small mini forest patches using fruit trees as our canopy species and guild centerpieces. The idea is to catch the available light at many different levels and also partition the soil, nutrients, and available space by interspersing deep-rooted dynamic accumulators such as comfrey with shallow-rooted ground covers like strawberries and lots of beneficial insect-attracting flowers and herbs like chives, sorrel, and yarrow. And so these all go underneath the fruit tree. I try to incorporate at least one kind of nitrogen fixer into each guild. So nitrogen fixers they have the ability to fix nitrogen from the air down in the root system, such as lupins, Siberian pea shrubs, and goomyberry bushes. The bushes and shrubs we found grow too tall, too fast, and so we actually have started coppicing them as they grow into the tree's lower branches. But coppicing is actually great because when you coppice, that releases the nitrogen that's on their roots into the soil. Coppicing itself is an interesting way to build soil. Not only is it an effective way of releasing the nitrogen into the soil, but also it's another way to sequester carbon and build organics down in the soil itself, as the roots usually shed almost an equal amount as you've cut off the top, and then they both regrow vigorously. And so when those roots die off down underneath, it's just carbon down in your subsoil as they break down. And then at the end here, I just have putting the individual pieces into integral patterns. So we've covered a bunch of topics in relative isolation, and of course this is not how ecology or any part of life for that matter really works. The magic is how they all work together and play off each other. Luckily, all of the techniques described above play well together. We use all of these ideas in tandem, and I believe this integration of annuals and perennials, all building soil together, ups the resiliency of the farm as a whole. And that's my presentation. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Paulin. I especially want to thank you for getting off the farm and coming and joining us online. I know you're used to bringing folks out onto the land with you, so I appreciate you being willing to do this in a completely different format. We are going to go to the general Q&A, but I think others like myself might be wondering, what is coppicing? Coppicing?
Oh, coppicing. Sorry.
Coppicing.
Yes, totally. So that's when you take certain trees will, when you cut them, they just regrow. So like an alder or a willow is a classic coppicing tree. And so when you coppice it, you cut it fairly low, knowing that it will resprout. So in the spring, you'll purposely cut it, and then it will reshoot. And it's similar to
I
it's coppicing if you do it down low. It's called pollarding if you do it up high. But it's yeah. So I'll often grow these trees just for the coppicing part because I actually just want the roots to shed and build carbon underneath.
gotcha. So it's increasing that new growth.
And then you get the tops. So if you're making biochar or whatever else you want the wood for, you can chip them. And so it's a kind of a neat system. Yeah.
Awesome. Thank you so much. I am going to invite Tara to join us again. And we have had some question come in from those who've joined us tonight. I would encourage folks, please, if you haven't already, type your questions into that Q&A box where you see the large question mark. Alternatively, if you want to ask your question live, just pop your digital hand up and we can give you the opportunity to address our presenters live. Um, so we've got a question from Andrew here. And this came in after your presentation, Tara, so maybe you could take a first stab. What if my soil is less than 2 feet deep, which was the recommended depth of that hole when you're testing your soil? I hit hard pan at about a foot deep on most of my property. Is a rain garden just not feasible?
I would say it may not be feasible as a do-it-yourself. You could potentially have somebody investigate the site, like a landscape architect can investigate and look at some options for you. I'm sure that there would be some solution. I have a similar property myself, and one of the options that I can use there is more of a above ground rain garden, which we call a flow through planter, where you're adding that material on top of the soil. So there can be other options. It just might not be suitable for DIY.
Thanks. Yeah, I was thinking for Gabriola Island, I know a lot of us are dealing with sandstone, so really shallow soil and then sandstone. So it would be a similar situation there. You'd be looking to sort of build on top. Yeah. Okay. Um, Laura has shared the question. I'm curious how your past work with the CRD on-site septic sewage system maintenance connects with rain gardens. So specifically bylaw 3479, if you're familiar with that one, Tara. Um, are there any concerns or best practices regarding the proximity of rain gardens to septic systems, particularly in preventing potential sewage contamination of the rain garden?
Yeah, definitely. So there's some recommended setbacks from the rain garden between a rain garden and a septic system. Definitely 3 meters, I believe, from the septic tank where the waste is contained, but you also want to be, I think it was 10 meters or so from the drain field area. And you also want to be thinking about the flow of the water. So are you downhill, or are in what direction will the water be flowing over the property? Because you also don't want to be oversaturating your drain field area. So you want to be protecting the soil capacity of your drain field area as well. So yeah, you definitely want to be maintaining a good distance and recommended setbacks between the two. You also want to be making sure that your septic system is in good condition. So making sure it's well maintained. If you haven't inspected the drain field in a long time, just making sure that everything is operational and working well, because then it should be passing cleansed water into the environment.
Thank you. Someone else has asked, would you recommend doing a rain garden in a backyard just to deal with heavy rain in the winter, even if it's not connected to a roof or other source of incoming water?
Just for the absorption. Yeah, I mean, I have seen there's a lot you can do in terms of like creating a swale like pollen showed us, to manage the rainfall or wet areas that are on your property. This could include a rain garden in some cases, depending on what's going on in your soil characteristics. So you may need to be amending the soil, but it can be a solution to create sort of a temporary pond, so to speak, version of a rain garden, sort of like a wetland in a way, to manage that soggy or excess rainfall area and allow the flow so that you have other drier areas of your property. So it can, I wouldn't exactly call it a rain garden, but it could be something that you explore in terms of managing that rainwater.
Hmm. And on that note, Lynn and Chris are wondering about rain barrels and tanks as part of a rain garden system, whether you have any kind of advice for that, Tara.
Well, rainwater harvesting can be very useful. I don't know, I don't have any experience with seeing it connected to a rain garden, but they can be useful in allowing slower infiltration so they can provide some storage capacity of rainfall, which can be really useful for things like irrigation, especially on the Gulf Islands, of course, where water can be an issue. But it can also just be really useful in terms of reducing the volume. So slowing down the flow of water if you have an area that's receiving water too quickly. So they definitely can be very useful. And I'm trying to think through if there's any issues with connecting that to a rain garden. The only thing I can think of is that you would just be trying to manage the flow of that water, which you don't necessarily have to do with a rain garden. Once you've designed it and set it up, it can sort of manage the flow of water on its own. So sort of a little bit of two distinct things going on there. Yeah.
Mhm. Yeah, I know I can share on where I live, where we are solely on rainwater catchment. We don't have a well, not connected to city water, obviously. We are always looking to find new ways of doing that water collection. And every year, if I want to grow the garden, it means I need to be capturing more water. So cisterns become a huge part of that. I know also some of the regional districts have rebate programs for that, where you can actually, get some of your money back for purchasing new cisterns and that. So the regional district of Nanaimo has a program. We'll be sure to link to that in our resources list that gets sent out. Um, Colin, we've got some questions for you here. Christy's wondering, can we add ashes to the compost? We burn mostly softwood.
Yeah, they're not great is the answer to that. You can, if you have just, I mean, I sprinkle them around my fruit trees, but very sparingly. I don't put them in my compost. Generally, the vegetable garden doesn't like it. They do have some good nutrients, but they have a fair bit of, they can be sort of, especially in high concentration, they can be quite toxic, and you don't really know what the concentration is. So the safest thing to do is sprinkle them very, very gently around your fruit trees, but yeah, not too much at once. And the most effective time to do that is actually in the spring because the most of that'll wash out in the winter, and so you won't actually get the benefit of it unless you add it right in the spring. And so I store most of mine, and I have like 300 fruit trees, so I'll just give them all a little bit in the spring. Is how I deal with my ashes, but I don't put them in my compost. No.
Anything else to avoid in compost? I've heard citrus is not good and it can attract rodents.
I mean, rodents are, yeah, that's definitely always a concern. Yeah, and so I do put citrus and banana peel in there. They don't break down great, but and again, if you don't have organic fruit, you're putting in some sort of pesticide when you do that. So that's another consideration. Yeah.
Okay. But any other
I mean,
warnings that you would have around,
there's
avoid or maybe sparingly adding certain things to your compost?
Well, I mean, again, obvious things like meat and stuff is, I mean, you can do it. It is more complicated, and so if you don't know what you're doing, I'd probably avoid it. I don't put it in. I put it in a whole different compost pile. That's on a slow. I don't use it in my vegetable garden. It's in an actual black rodent-proof bin. So I have two. I have all my compost bins that get used in the garden, and then I do have one of those black bins off to the side of the house that I'll put the weird things that I don't want to put in my garden compost, like chicken bones and things like that that you're sketched out by. And then those you can remove out and let them sit for 2 or 3 years and I put them in my comfrey patch to just feed my comfrey. So that's
Hmm.
how I deal with that sort of thing.
Um, Someone's asking, is there anything they can do to introduce or encourage mycelium? I know you talked about inoculating your fruit trees when you're first
Yeah,
planting
so I
them.
mean, you'll get mycelium no matter what. I mean, there is a certain type of mycelium that fruit trees like, and so if just by adding organic matter, especially wood chips and like carb leaves, anything high in carbon, not so much nitrogen, you'll get mycelium will show up. You'll see it. But and you can gently go out into the forest and just grab a little bit of soil from under a healthy maple tree and add it to your tree. That'll spread. So it's pretty cheap to buy as well. I think it's worth buying the proper stuff. But those are two ways you can basically give it the right food. It will show up, and you can inoculate it with a little bit of natural stuff if you're yeah. And then once you have a healthy one, you can move it around. Like if you have a fruit tree that you know is in good shape, you can take some of that soil and add it to the when you plant a new tree, and that'll do it.
Gotcha. Um, so Pauline, you mentioned the ducks do a great job of staying on top of slugs. Susan's wondering, do you encourage garter snakes for that job as well?
Yeah, yeah, rocks and I mean they just again they come on their own. I don't bring them in, but if you give them a little bit of habitat, absolutely. And they typically like gardens that aren't yeah, like they love the fruit trees, any sort of, and we have a lot of logs and rocks lying around and so yeah, and they do eat slugs as well. Absolutely.
Um, Tara Shirley is wondering if you know of any of the municipal planning departments, whether they've included rain gardens to new developments in building plans so that developers can actually finance this, both for, residential homes and commercial spaces. Is that something, sort of a trend that you're seeing within the regional district, especially around parking lots?
Yes, definitely. So, yeah, we're seeing developments, more and more developments happen in the region that I'm not sure the level of requirement that the municipalities are putting on them, but it's definitely occurring. So we have some really proactive developers that are doing things like green roofs. We see a lot of rain gardens. The city of Victoria has implemented a very innovative rainwater rewards program with developer requirements, but also for homeowners, private property owners to install various green stormwater infrastructure on their properties and receive sort of a rebate on their taxes. So it's definitely a growing trend. There's more of it happening. There's more incentive for it, and yeah, it's really encouraging to see.
Um, this might be a tricky one. I'm sure there's a huge range, but would you be able to give an estimate of sort of a base cost to build a rain garden like the one that you featured in your presentation?
Yeah, that is really tricky. So, it depends. Are you going to use a machine? Are you gonna convince your neighbors to come and help you for free? Um, Sourcing the compost can be really challenging. So, getting a good quality compost, you don't, depending on the size, we're only talking about like 100 to maybe 300 square feet. So a third of that, we're not talking about huge volumes. That would probably be the majority of the cost. That and then depending on where you source your plants from. Um, it's really hard for me to put a cost on that actually. I don't
Yeah,
even think I could come up with a ballpark at the moment, but that's something that I can try to do for future. So I'll think about that. Thank you.
great. Thank you. Um, Pauline, if you were to give a piece of advice for someone sort of just starting out, maybe they've got an acre, what's sort of like the first stage in planning?
Well, of course, my
It's
permaculture background would say the first step is to observe and don't, you know, pay attention and watch it for a while first, and that's the first step. And yeah, and then you'll see which way the water is running, and you'll see what's you'll see a lot of things that will inform your decisions and your plans. But that's sort of my pat answer. But also to be more interesting, I mean, I love the trees, so I would think about as you're observing and trying to figure it out, I would always be trying to and then and so that's I mean, I would while you're planning it, you're watching your sun also, because of course, sun is this whole, you need sunlight. And on Gabriola, that's often a limiting factor too, right? So that's part of what you're paying attention to and part of what you're choosing what you realistically can grow. I mean, I'm used to my farm and I have a ton of sun. I forget when I go do plants, I'm realizing, oh, wow, there's not that much sun to work with, and it does change your options. And so those are factors that it depends on, I guess. But yeah, so I mean, I would mostly say gather information. And then,
Mhm.
I mean, I, boy, it's been a while, but what I used to do when I did design work was that your design is basically a marriage between your site observations and your goals. And so you get clear on both of those things that are separate, and then you see how they actually interact. And that's when you start making a plan. And so sometimes your plan, your goals don't easily match your site, and then you have to be creative or drop some. And sometimes they do. And so those are the two things that you're working with, I think, and you're trying to find the happy balance between the two. Yeah, that's a long-winded answer, but that's what I got.
Absolutely. Um, Speaking of swales, is there a particular time of year that is sort of best to be thinking about building these? Obviously, if you're wanting to sort of capture water, doing it before the rainy season, but any considerations around sort of seasonal, what's the best time to be doing that?
Yeah, I mean, it's the best time to pay attention is now, and not do it now. Obviously, you don't want to be digging right now, but it's nice to do it. Like I've done them in the spring when it's still raining, but it's dry enough to dig, and it's kind of fun because I don't usually use an actual water level, and so if it will rain, I'll eyeball it, and I have an A level that I kind of run out my rough contours with. And then it's nice if it is raining because you can dig it, and when a decent rain comes, you'll actually get to watch it, and you'll see where it flows and where it pools, and if it flows too fast or if it's flowing a little bit too slow and it's pooling too much. And so if I either do it in the fall or the spring when it is raining a little bit, but the soil's still nice texture to dig is my best answer for that. But it's awesome to get the rain feedback and adjust it. You can put a hose on it if you're doing it in the summer and get the same feedback, but it's not quite as romantic.
Appreciate that. Um, a few comments that have come here that I just wanted to share. This is from Susan. Thank you, Tara, for talking about developers and rain gardens and other climate mitigation plans in the Islands Trust area. This is the kind of requirement that could be a valuable amenity for any kind of amenity zone or development permit area. So, hoping to see more encouragement of that. Just having a quick scan here. Um, where can I go for help if I run into issues building my own rain garden? I know, Tara, you
Mhm.
mentioned a little bit about, plan, make sure you know whether or not you're going to need the professional help. But let's say I got keen and started to do a DIY version and sort of got stuck. What's the best option for me to go for help?
Yeah, that's a really good question. You can, I mean, I'd like to offer our services and say you can give us a call and we will try to talk through whatever the challenges that you're having. In the resource list that I'm going to provide, there's some really good resources there. The guidebook for Western Washington on building a rain garden is excellent. It works through a number of common mistakes or pitfalls or issues that might occur. And also, they're called they're over in Delta. I think they're called the Cougar Creek Stream Keepers. They'll be on the resource list as well, and they have some really good information on their website, like common issues or top tips. Um, so I would encourage you to look through those. I don't know of I'm trying. Yeah, I don't know of anything else. If you could get a hold of a landscape architect and maybe just, I don't know if they do sort of a consult that might help you um, work through whatever it is that you're having a challenge with.
Absolutely. Well, I don't see any more questions coming in through the chat. As I mentioned, we have recorded this evening's webinar, so by early next week, we'll have that posted on our website as well as our YouTube channel. You can also go to both of those places to watch recordings of previous webinars we've done in the series. So I know earlier in the presentation, we heard about the importance of biodiversity and species at risk, knowing that the Islands Trust area is a particularly rich spot for species at risk. And so we've got some great resources on considerations for property holders in terms of creating safe habitat for species at risk. We will also be sending out that resource list to all of those who registered. So I do want to really thank our our presenters. Thank you, Tara. Thank you, Pauline, for sharing your knowledge with us. It feels very timely to be thinking about, sort of doing the groundwork now, putting that thoughtful planning in, knowing that planting season is upon us within the next couple months here. So again, thank you so much for joining us. And for those of us, for those of you joining us this evening, I also want to encourage you to register for our final webinar in this year's Stewardship Education program. On March 4th, we will be hosting a conversation on what a management strategy for fallow deer in the Southern Gulf Islands might look like. So just starting to provide some information about the history of fallow deer, how they ended up in the Southern Gulf Islands, and the type of impacts that they're having, and how we might start to get organized to try to tackle that issue. So please go to our website, sign up for that webinar, and of course, you can also find out other resources on our Stewardship Education webpage on the Islands Trust website. So thanks again, everyone.